People say twins have a special connection, a bond that can't be explained. It's really true. I remember when my twin brother died, and it was like losing a piece of myself. To explain how close we were, I have to go back about a year or so before he died. He was diagnosed with a viral heart infection, and the outlook was not good. The doctor told us we would be lucky if he lived past 6 months. A new experimental medicine is what kept him going past the 6 month. Oddly enough, I would be prescribed that same medication almost 30 years later. After a few weeks in the hospital, he was allowed to come home with a lot of restrictions. He could not have any physical exertion. As a 15-year-old kid, there were times he wouldn't listen, and he would try to be active, and his heart would begin to race, and he would just pass out. He couldn't even go to school. We had a tutor come every day. He was on a strict diet. Slowly, he would get better. He even got strong enough to go back to school the next school year. Even though he was getting better, I couldn't shake this feeling that he was going to die. I had many dreams of him dying, and in every dream, he died a different way, and it was never because of his heart. In one dream, he fell out of a window. In one dream, he got shot. I started carrying a picture of him, and every time I thought of him, I would take it out and stare at it like I was in a trance. We were always very close, but after his diagnosis, we were practically inseparable. I and my brother loved music, and we had a reputation around the neighborhood for being really good DJs. They called us the DJ Twins. We even got an opportunity to DJ at a local club. We were so excited, and we practiced a lot for it. The loud music all the time was driving my mother crazy. A friend of ours, who was sort of a fan, told us we could practice at his house because his parents were never home, and we could play the music as loud as we liked. One night after practicing, we were walking home from my friend's house. It was me, my brother, and 3 other friends who lived in the same apartment building we lived in. It was only like a 2-mile walk home, and we were about halfway home when we decided to cross the street. We had just stepped into the street when we noticed a car coming, so we waited in between some parked cars for the car to pass. But as the car got closer, it began to pick up speed. We could hear the engine revving. The street we were on had a steep curve to the left, but instead of steering the car through the curve, it veered right towards us. We were all laughing, like, look at this idiot. We thought it was someone we knew trying to scare us, but the car just kept coming faster and faster right at us. They had to be going at least 50 miles an hour, and it became obvious this was no joke. I remember diving under one of the parked cars and looking up and hearing loud crashing noises and seeing debris flying everywhere. It seemed like everything was moving in slow motion. I screamed as loud as I could to my brother, "Get out of the way," but the car hit him head on and he went flying, literally. I got up from under the parked car and noticed all the parked cars around us were mangled beyond recognition. I looked around, but I didn't see my brother, only one shoe where the car struck him. About a second later, he landed about 30 feet away, very hard. I ran over to him yelling at him, "Why didn't you move?" "I told you to get out of the way." I was literally losing it. Then I said to myself, "Get it together. You gotta help your brother." I yelled to one of my friends, "Go call 911. He had to go run to a phone booth. There were no such thing as cell phones back then. Luckily, there was a phone booth close to us. I told another friend to run and get my mother. I sat with my brother and saw that his eyes were closed and he was eerily still. I wasn't sure what to do next. Then I remembered a show I saw on TV the week prior of what to do during an emergency involving trauma. It said to feel for broken bones. Check airway for breathing. Check for a pulse in people unconscious. So I started from the bottom and worked my way up. As I started checking his legs for broken bones, I noticed both pant legs had holes in them with bones sticking through. Then I felt his belly. Then it felt like jelly squishing around. Pushing on his belly, however, caused blood to start gushing from his mouth and ears. He even had tears that were laced in blood coming from his eyes. I opened his mouth to see if he could breathe, and there was so much blood you couldn't even see his tongue. And the blood was bubbling as if he was trying to breathe, but there was just too much blood. I noticed both arms seemed to be moved in a way arms are not supposed to move. I lifted his head and laid it on my lap, and that's when I noticed my hands and pants being covered in blood. I checked the back of his head to see that it had split open from the impact of landing on the pavement. In my head, right then, I knew he wasn't going to make it. In my heart, I was holding on for a miracle. Just then, my friend who had called for an ambulance came running down the street saying, "They don't believe me." I said, "Are you kidding me?" I told him to stay with my brother, and I ran to the phone as fast as I could. I got on the phone and pleaded, "Please hurry. He's hurt bad. There's blood everywhere. This is not a joke." They began asking all kinds of questions. I gave them the location and begged them to hurry. Maybe 10 minutes later, the police and ambulance arrived. My mother came running up the street shortly after, crying hysterically. A pastor who happened to be driving by in a church van stopped and told us to get in and he would drive us to the hospital. I remember the paramedics putting him in some kind of bodysuit and blowing it up to stabilize his many broken bones, and then they loaded him into the ambulance. I remember clutching my mother as hard as I could, closing my eyes and crying. Suddenly she let out a yell. "Oh no." When I looked up to see what she was yelling for, I could see the paramedics in the back of the ambulance giving him CPR. Just then, a police officer came to the van and said he thinks they found the car several blocks away and he needed me to come with them to identify the car. He took me and my friends in the back of the police car to find the people who had done this horrible thing. As we were driving, I told my friend I knew he was gonna die. I had been dreaming it. I told him I even started carrying his picture, and I pulled it out to show him. I started praying, "God, if you can please do this one miracle. I would do anything. Please, God." We approached the car that hit my brother. It looked so damaged. I don't know how they made it that far. You could see blood inside the car indicating the people who had done this were also injured. We drove around, but never found them. The police checked every hospital in the city to see if anyone had recently come in with auto accident injuries. They had no success. The police then drove me to the hospital where my brother was taken. I met up with my mother. She held me, and we both cried as we waited for word from a doctor. About an hour later, a doctor came out to talk to us, and I will never forget the words he said. We tried everything we could, but the injuries were just too severe, and he didn't make it. I stood there with my mouth wide open, even though I saw how bad his injuries were. I just couldn't believe there was not going to be a miracle. I remember asking the doctor if he had really died. The doctor said very softly as he lowered his head, "Yes." They cleaned him up, and my mom went in to see him one last time. That must have been the hardest thing she ever had to do in her life. We went home after that. I just couldn't believe we were going home without him. I don't even remember how we got home. I just remember laying in his bed and crying. We used to do this thing. Even at 15 and 16 years old, if one of us had a bad dream, we would get in the other's bed, and that calmed us down. That night, I drifted off in his bed, and I swear I felt his arm on my shoulder, and I said, "Man, I had a bad dream you died." And as I started to come to my senses, I realized that he was really gone, and I turned over quickly to see who had touched me, and there was no one there. I will never forget that. About a week later, we went to view his body the day before the burial. The mortuary pleaded with my mother to do a closed casket ceremony, but she insisted that she wanted to see him one last time. I wish she had done a closed casket because he was so disfigured, you couldn't tell it was him. I didn't even go to the funeral. I was so traumatized seeing him that way. In case you are wondering, the people who killed him were never caught. I wish I could tell them the damage they caused, how they changed the trajectories of our lives, and see if they had any remorse for the life they took. My brother passed away on Friday the 13th in April of 1984 at the age of 16. My mother died over 40 years later at the age of 62 from a stroke, but she was never the same after my brother died. Because we were identical twins, she must have thought of him every time she looked at me. Thank you for allowing me to share my story with you. Please like and subscribe so you can hear more true stories like this one. I hope you join me on the next true life story.